The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's emergency room buzzed like
I don't know
angry
what to
wasps
do. I'm just so
overhead,
worried about her.
casting harsh shadows across David Chen's weathered face. His calloused hands, still stained with welding burns from his double shift, trembled as he held his 8-year-old daughter, Lily's small fingers. She lay unconscious on the hospital gurney, her usually vibrant face pale as porcelain, a stark contrast to the dried blood matting her dark hair. "Daddy?" she had whispered just 20 minutes ago, her voice barely audible over the screaming sirens. "Are we going to be okay?" David had lied. He'd smiled through his tears and promised her everything would be fine, even as the paramedics worked frantically to stabilize her vitals, even as he watched his entire world hanging by a thread. The drunk driver who'd run the red light and slammed into their 10-year-old Honda Civic had walked away without a scratch. David had pulled Lily from the wreckage himself, her blood staining his work shirt, her tiny body so still it had stopped his heart for a moment that felt like eternity. Now Dr. Harrison, a stern-faced man in his 50s with silver hair and tired eyes, approached with a clipboard and an expression that David had learned to fear. It was the same look every doctor, every bill collector, every landlord had given him for the past 3 years, since cancer had taken his wife, Sarah's mother. "Mr. Chen," Dr. Harrison began, his voice professionally distant, "I need to discuss your daughter's condition and the financial arrangements." David's throat constricted. He'd heard those words before, during Sarah's final months, when the medical bills had consumed their savings, their home, their future. "How is she, Doc? That's all I need to know right now." Dr. Harrison glanced at his chart, then back at David with a mixture of sympathy and resignation. "Your daughter has suffered severe internal bleeding. There's a tear in her spleen and possible damage to her liver. She needs emergency surgery within the next 2 hours, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Then operate," David said immediately, standing up so fast his chair scraped against the linoleum floor. "Do whatever you need to do. I'll figure out the money. Mr. Chen, I understand your urgency, but the hospital requires payment authorization for emergency procedures of this magnitude. We're looking at approximately $50,000 for the surgery alone, not including post-operative care, medications, and potential complications." Dr. Harrison's voice was practiced, clinical, but David caught the slight tremor of discomfort. Without insurance or immediate payment guarantee, the words hit David like a physical blow. $50,000. He made $32,000 a year working double shifts at the shipyard, welding together pieces of other people's dreams while his own crumbled. After rent, utilities, food, and Lily's school expenses, he had maybe $200 in savings on a good month. "There has to be something," David's voice cracked. "Payment plans, charity care, anything. She's 8 years old. She hasn't even lost her first tooth yet. She still believes in the tooth fairy, for God's sake." Dr. Harrison's expression softened slightly, but his hands remained firmly on the clipboard. "I wish I could help, Mr. Chen. The hospital has strict policies about emergency procedures, without payment authorization or insurance approval, which could take days we don't have." "Days we don't have," David repeated, the reality crushing down on him like a collapsing building. He looked back at Lily, so small and fragile on the oversized gurney, surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed, keeping her alive minute by minute. What kind of world do we live in, where a child's life depends on how much money her father has in his bank account? The question hung in the sterile air between them. Dr. Harrison had no answer, because there wasn't one that made sense, wasn't one that didn't sound like a betrayal of everything medicine was supposed to represent. David sank back into the plastic chair, burying his face in his hands. The smell of disinfectant and desperation filled his nostrils. 3 years ago, he'd sat in a similar chair in a similar room, watching his wife slip away as the bills mounted and the treatments became more expensive and less effective. He'd promised her, in those final moments, that he would protect Lily, that he would give her the life they'd dreamed of together. "I'll sign anything," David whispered, looking up at Dr. Harrison with eyes that had seen too much loss. "I'll work the rest of my life to pay it off. I'll mortgage my soul if I have to. Just save my daughter. Mr. Chen, it's not about willingness to pay. The hospital needs immediate financial assurance. Without it, I'm legally restricted from proceeding with elective surgery." "Elective?" David's voice rose, drawing stares from nearby nurses. "My daughter is dying, and you're calling it elective?" Before Dr. Harrison could respond, a commotion erupted near the trauma bay entrance. David heard urgent voices, the rapid squeak of wheels on linoleum, and the distinctive sound of medical professionals moving with purpose. He turned to see another gurney rushing past, followed by a team of doctors and nurses he didn't recognize. But among them, one figure caught his attention. A woman in surgical scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, her face focused and determined, as she barked orders to the team around her. There was something about her presence, an authority that seemed to command respect from everyone in her vicinity. As she passed, her eyes briefly met David's across the chaotic emergency room. For just a moment, in that split second of human connection, he saw something that Dr. Harrison's professional demeanor had lacked. Genuine concern, not just for medical protocols and payment procedures, but for the human cost of the decisions being made in these sterile halls. Then she was gone, disappearing behind the trauma bay doors, leaving David alone with Dr. Harrison and the impossible choice that no parent should ever have to make. The clock on the wall ticked mercilessly forward, 1 hour and 47 minutes until his daughter's fate would be sealed by the contents of his empty wallet. David Chen's story didn't begin in that emergency room, though it felt like his real life had ended there 3 years ago when cancer first knocked on their door. Back then, he'd been a different man, younger, more optimistic, with calloused hands that built dreams instead of just surviving day to day. He'd worked the same welding job at Peninsula Shipyard, but the money had gone toward weekend trips to the zoo, piano lessons for Lily, and saving for a house with a backyard where she could play. Sarah, his wife, not his daughter, had been a kindergarten teacher at Lily's school. She'd come home every evening with stories about her students, flour in her hair from art projects, and an endless supply of patience for their 5-year-old daughter's constant questions about everything from why the sky was blue to whether butterflies remembered being caterpillars. "You know what Lily asked me today?" Sarah would say, settling into David's arms on their second-hand couch after dinner. "She wanted to know if love has a color. I told her it was probably yellow, like sunshine, but she said no, it's definitely purple because that's the color of her bedroom walls, and she feels the most loved when we tuck her in at night." Those conversations felt like lifetimes ago now. The diagnosis had come on a Tuesday morning in October, stage 3 ovarian cancer, the doctor had said, speaking in medical terms that might as well have been a foreign language. Sarah had squeezed David's hands so tight he thought she might break his fingers, but her voice had remained steady as she asked about treatment options, survival rates, and what this meant for their family. David had asked simpler questions. How do we beat this? What do we need to do? How much will it cost? The answers had changed everything. Surgery, chemotherapy, experimental treatments, each with a price tag that grew larger as Sarah's condition worsened. Their insurance covered some of it, but the co-pays, the out-of-network specialists, the medications that weren't quite covered, the travel expenses for better treatment centers, it all added up faster than David could work. He'd taken on extra shifts, weekend work, anything he could find. Sarah had kept teaching as long as she could, even when the chemo made her so sick she could barely stand. "The kids need consistency," she'd insisted, "and we need the insurance." Lily, barely 6 years old, had watched her mother fade away with the kind of stoic acceptance that no child should ever have to learn. She'd helped Sarah with her medications, bringing her water and crackers when the nausea hit. She'd drawn pictures of their family, always with 3 people, always smiling, even when reality looked very different. The end had come 18 months after the diagnosis, on a spring morning when the cherry trees were blooming outside their bedroom window. Sarah had been in and out of consciousness for days, the hospice nurse checking on her every few hours. David had been holding her hand, telling her about Lily's latest achievement at school, when Sarah's breathing simply stopped. "Daddy?" Lily had whispered from the doorway, where she'd been watching with her stuffed elephant clutched against her chest. "Is Mommy sleeping forever now?" David had nodded, unable to speak, and Lily had climbed onto the bed to say goodbye to her mother for the last time. She'd kissed Sarah's forehead and whispered, "I'll take care of Daddy for you, Mommy. I promise." That promise had become the guiding principle of their new life together. After Sarah's funeral, the bills had continued arriving like persistent ghosts. The medical debt, even after insurance, totaled over $200,000. The house had to go, sold to pay for treatments that hadn't worked. Their savings, Sarah's life, insurance, everything they had built together had disappeared into the vast, hungry maw of the American healthcare system. David and Lily had moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a part of town where the sirens never stopped and the heat barely worked in winter. David had given Lily the bedroom, setting up a makeshift sleeping area for himself in the living room. She'd never complained, not once, though he sometimes caught her staring out the window at the apartment complex playground, where the equipment was rusty and half the swings were broken. The shipyard job, which had once felt like honest work toward a better future, became pure survival. David worked the day shift welding hull plates, then picked up Lily from the after-school program at 6 p.m. While she did homework at the kitchen table, he'd heat up whatever budget meal he could afford, usually pasta with jarred sauce or rice and beans, occasionally splurging on chicken when it was on sale. "Daddy, why do we eat the same thing every week?" Lily had asked one evening, pushing spaghetti around her plate. "Because we're saving money for important things," David had replied, sitting across from her with his own plate. "Like your school supplies and birthday presents." "What if I don't need birthday presents?" she'd offered seriously. "Maybe we could save that money for when you get sick, so you don't have to go away like Mommy did." The innocence of that statement had nearly broken him. 8 years old, and she was already worried about losing her only remaining parent to medical bills. Evenings were their sacred time. After dinner, they'd sit on the couch together, Lily curled against his side, David's arm around her shoulders, and she'd tell him about her day. She was smart, scary smart, already reading at a level 2 grades above her age. She loved art, science experiments, and had recently become obsessed with astronomy after checking out a library book about the solar system. "Did you know that Saturn's rings are made of ice and rock?" she'd informed him one night, her eyes bright with excitement. "And Jupiter has a storm that's been going on for hundreds of years? Mrs. Peterson says I should be an astronaut when I grow up." "You could be anything you want," David had told her, meaning every word while silently calculating whether they could afford the encyclopedia, set she'd been eyeing at the used bookstore. Weekends were adventures on a budget. They'd pack peanut butter sandwiches and spend Saturdays at the free museums downtown, or hike the trails in the state park where parking didn't cost anything. Lily would collect interesting rocks and leaves, creating elaborate displays on their kitchen windowsill. David had taught her to play chess on a set he'd found at a garage sale, and she'd beaten him for the first time just last month. "I let you win," he'd teased, even though they both knew it wasn't true. "You're a terrible liar, Daddy," she'd giggled, resetting the pieces for another game. The hardest part wasn't the tight budget or the long hours, or even the exhaustion that seemed to seep into his bones. It was the constant underlying fear that something would happen to Lily, and he wouldn't be able to protect her the way he'd failed to protect Sarah. Every cough lasted too long, every scraped knee from the playground could be more serious than it looked. Every parent-teacher conference included questions about Lily's home situation that made David feel like a failure. "She's a remarkable child," Mrs. Rodriguez, Lily's teacher, had told him at their last meeting. "Mature beyond her years, academically gifted, kind to her classmates. But I sometimes worry she's carrying too much responsibility for someone her age." David had nodded, knowing exactly what she meant. Lily packed her own lunch in the mornings, reminded him about school events, and had learned to do laundry standing on a step stool because David worked late some evenings. She'd grown up too fast, forced into independence by circumstances neither of them had chosen, but she was happy, genuinely happy, in a way that constantly amazed him. She laughed at his terrible jokes, sang off-key songs while drawing pictures at the kitchen table, and told him every night before bed that he was the best daddy in the whole universe, even better than the dads on TV. That Tuesday afternoon, David had picked her up from school as usual, listening to her chatter about a science project on volcanoes, and her friend Madison's upcoming birthday party that she probably wouldn't be able to attend, because birthday parties meant presents they couldn't afford. "It's okay, Daddy," she'd said, noticing his expression in the rearview mirror. "Madison has enough friends. She won't miss me." They'd been stopped at a red light just 6 blocks from home, when the drunk driver had run the intersection at 40 miles per hour, slamming into the passenger side of their car, where Lily sat with her backpack full of homework and dreams of becoming an astronaut. Now, sitting in that emergency room chair with his daughter fighting for her life 20 feet away, David understood that some storms were too big to weather alone, no matter how much love you had to offer. Wakistao. Dr. Sarah Morgan had been in surgery for 14 straight hours when the call came through her pager. Emergency trauma, internal bleeding, 8-year-old female, ETA 3 minutes. She stripped off her gloves from the appendectomy she'd just completed, her third surgery of the day, and headed toward the trauma bay with the kind of focused energy that came from years of saving lives under pressure. At 32, Sarah was one of the youngest attending surgeons at St. Mary's, a fact that had earned her both respect and resentment from colleagues who'd taken longer paths to the same position. What they didn't know, what nobody at the hospital knew, was that her rapid advancement had less to do with exceptional skill, though she certainly possessed that, and more to do with the fact that her father owned the medical center where she'd completed her residency, along with 3 other hospitals in the city. Richard Morgan's name was printed on bronze plaques throughout the medical district. His pharmaceutical company had funded half the research wings in the state, and his influence in healthcare was so pervasive that most people simply accepted it as a fact of life, like gravity or taxes. Sarah had spent her entire career running from that shadow, choosing the most demanding specialties, working the longest hours, taking the cases that other doctors deemed too risky or too complicated. She'd started medical school with a trust fund that could have bought her a small country, but had lived on student loans and ramen noodles, determined to prove she belonged in medicine for reasons that had nothing to do with her last name. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was now working at a hospital her father's foundation had helped fund. But St. Mary's served the city's most underserved populations, and Sarah had specifically requested assignment here because it was as far from her father's world of private medicine and wealthy patients as she could get. The trauma bay doors burst open just as Sarah finished scrubbing in. The paramedics wheeled in a small figure on a gurney, a girl with dark hair matted with blood, her tiny frame dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding her. Behind the gurney, Sarah caught a glimpse of a man in work clothes, his face etched with the kind of terror that only a parent could understand. "What do we have?" Sarah called out, her voice cutting through the chaos as nurses moved with practiced efficiency around the gurney. 8-year-old female, motor vehicle accident, passenger side impact, the lead paramedic reported rapidly. Possible internal bleeding. Vitals are stable, but weakening. Father says she was conscious at the scene, but lost consciousness en route. Sarah moved to the girl's side, her hands already assessing, her mind running through protocols and possibilities. The child was beautiful, even in her injured state, delicate features that reminded Sarah of a porcelain doll, but with an underlying strength that spoke of resilience. This wasn't a child who gave up easily. "Lily," the man in work clothes called out desperately as the medical team worked. "Her name is Lily. She's 8. She's all I have." The words hit Sarah with unexpected force. She glanced up briefly, making eye contact with the father across the trauma bay. David Chen. She could see his name on the visitor's badge pinned to his work shirt. His eyes held the same desperate hope she'd seen in countless family members over the years. But there was something else there, too. A bone-deep exhaustion. The look of someone who'd already lost too much and couldn't bear to lose more. "Mr. Chen," Sarah said firmly but gently, never stopping her examination of Lily. "I'm Dr. Morgan. I'm going to take very good care of your daughter. Can you tell me what happened?" "Car accident," David's voice cracked. "Drunk driver ran a red light, hit us on her side. She was talking to me at first, asking if we were okay, but then she just closed her eyes." Sarah nodded, continuing her assessment. Lily's abdomen was distended, indicating internal bleeding. Her blood pressure was dropping, despite the IV fluids the paramedics had started. This was serious, potentially life-threatening, but treatable if they moved quickly. "We need to get her to OR3, Sarah announced to her team. "Prep for emergency exploratory surgery, possible splenic laceration, potential liver involvement." As the nurses began moving Lily toward the operating room, Sarah caught Dr. Harrison approaching David with a clipboard and that particular expression that meant financial discussions. She'd seen it countless times. The moment when medical care became about money instead of healing. Sarah had a choice to make. Hospital protocol demanded that financial arrangements be settled before non-emergency surgery. But looking at Lily's pale face and David's worn work clothes, Sarah could guess how that conversation was going to go. She'd seen too many cases where treatment was delayed or denied because families couldn't pay up front, and she'd never been able to reconcile that reality with the oath she'd taken to do no harm. "Dr. Harrison," Sarah called out, stepping away from Lily's gurney. "I need to speak with you privately." They moved to a corner of the trauma bay, where Sarah could still keep an eye on Lily while speaking in low tones. "The patient needs immediate surgery," Sarah said without preamble. "Delayed treatment could result in exsanguination and death." "I understand the medical urgency, Dr. Morgan, but you know hospital policy. Emergency procedures of this magnitude require payment authorization. The father has no insurance, no savings. We're looking at $50,000 minimum." Sarah felt something cold settle in her stomach. She'd grown up in a world where $50,000 was pocket change, where medical bills were never even seen, just handled by accountants and administrative assistants. But she'd also worked long enough in public hospitals to understand what that number meant to a family like David Chen's. "What if I personally guarantee the payment?" Sarah asked quietly. Dr. Harrison raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Morgan, that's highly unusual. And frankly, on your salary, that kind of guarantee—" "Let me worry about my finances," Sarah interrupted. "That little girl needs surgery now. I'm authorizing it under my personal guarantee. We can sort out the paperwork later." It was a decision that would have made her father proud and furious in equal measure. Proud because she was taking responsibility and action. Furious because she was risking her career and financial future for strangers. But as Sarah looked back at Lily, so small and vulnerable on the gurney, she knew it was the only choice she could live with. 20 minutes later, Sarah was scrubbed in and standing over Lily in OR 3. The operating room was her sanctuary, the place where her father's money and influence meant nothing, where only skill and determination mattered. Under the bright surgical lights, with her team of nurses and technicians, Sarah was exactly who she was meant to be. "Scalpel," she said calmly, and the familiar ritual began. The surgery revealed exactly what Sarah had suspected: a lacerated spleen and minor liver damage from the impact. Serious but repairable in skilled hands. For 3 hours, Sarah worked with the kind of precision that had made her reputation, each suture and repair bringing Lily closer to recovery. "She's lucky," Sarah murmured to her surgical nurse as she closed the final incision. A few more hours of delay, and this could have been much worse. But even as she spoke, Sarah was thinking about David Chen sitting in the waiting room, probably calculating how he was going to pay for a procedure that cost more than his annual salary. She was thinking about the look in his eyes when he'd said Lily was all he had. She was thinking about her own privileged upbringing and how different her life would have been if she'd grown up worrying about money instead of trying to escape from having too much of it. As the anesthesia wore off and Lily was transferred to recovery, Sarah made another decision that would change everything. Instead of going home to her downtown condo with its view of the harbor, instead of grabbing a few hours of sleep before her next shift, she walked to the family waiting area where David was still sitting in that same plastic chair, his head in his hands. "Mr. Chen?" David looked up, and Sarah saw the exact moment when hope and fear collided in his expression. "The surgery went perfectly," Sarah said quickly, wanting to ease his terror as fast as possible. "Lily is going to be fine. We repaired the damage to her spleen and liver. She's in recovery now, and you can see her in about an hour." David's face crumpled with relief. "Thank you," he whispered, then said it again louder. "Thank you, Dr. Morgan. I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't need to repay me," Sarah said, sitting down in the chair beside him. "But I do need to tell you something about the financial arrangements." She watched David's expression change, saw him steel himself for bad news. "I've arranged for the hospital to bill me directly for Lily's surgery and recovery," Sarah continued. "You don't need to worry about payment right now. Focus on your daughter's recovery." David stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. "I don't understand. Why would you do that? You don't even know us." Sarah paused, trying to find words that wouldn't reveal too much about her own situation, while still being honest. "Because every child deserves medical care regardless of their family's financial situation. And because I could see how much you love your daughter. That's worth protecting." It was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that Sarah had been searching for something her entire life. A purpose that wasn't connected to her father's expectations or her trust fund, or the guilt that came from having more than she could ever need. Sitting in that waiting room, looking at David's grateful tears, she felt closer to that purpose than she ever had before. "I can't accept charity," David said quietly. "I'll find a way to pay you back, every penny. It might take years, but I will." "It's not charity," Sarah replied. "It's what medicine should be. And maybe I could check on Lily during her recovery. Make sure she's healing properly." She told herself it was professional concern, but she knew it was more than that. There was something about this family, about David's quiet strength and Lily's brave spirit, that called to something deep inside her. For the first time in her life, Sarah wanted to be part of something real, something that mattered beyond hospital hierarchies and surgical statistics. David nodded slowly. "I'd like that. Lily would like that too. She's going to want to thank you herself when she wakes up." As Sarah walked away from the waiting room, she realized she'd just committed herself to something far more complicated than paying for a surgery. She'd opened a door to a world completely different from her own, and she had no idea where it would lead. But for the first time in years, that uncertainty felt like hope rather than fear. Weave. 3 days after the surgery, Sarah found herself walking toward Lily's hospital room with a cup of coffee she didn't need and excuses she'd been rehearsing since dawn. "Just checking on the patient's progress," she'd told herself. "Standard post-operative care." But the small bag of art supplies tucked under her arm suggested this visit was anything but standard. Lily was awake when Sarah knocked gently on the door frame. The little girl was propped up against pillows, her dark hair brushed and braided, clearly David's careful work, and she was drawing on a notepad with a crayon that had seen better days. David sat in the chair beside her bed, reading what looked like a library book about space exploration. "Dr. Morgan," Lily's face lit up with a smile that could have powered the entire hospital. "Daddy said you're the one who fixed me up inside." "I helped," Sarah said modestly, stepping into the room. "But you did the hard work of getting better. How are you feeling today?" "Much better. My tummy doesn't hurt so much anymore, and Daddy brought me my drawing pad." Lily held up her artwork, a crayon drawing of what appeared to be a hospital with stick figures in white coats. "This is you." She pointed to one figure with black hair. "You have a superhero cape because you saved me." Sarah felt her throat tighten unexpectedly. "That's beautiful, Lily. You're a very talented artist." David stood up, setting his book aside. "Dr. Morgan, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done. The financial arrangement, the surgery, checking on her every day." "Please, just call me Sarah," she interrupted. "And I brought something for you, Lily, if it's okay with your dad." She pulled out the bag of art supplies, new crayons, colored pencils, a sketch pad, and some watercolor paints. Nothing expensive by her standards, but she could see from David's expression that it represented more than he could have afforded. "For me?" Lily's eyes went wide. "Really? New crayons?" "Sarah, you don't need to," David began. "I wanted to," Sarah said firmly. "Lily, I heard you like to draw, and I thought maybe while you're getting better, you could create some artwork for the hospital. The walls could use more color." Lily immediately dove into the new supplies, her small hands exploring the fresh crayons with reverence. "Look, Daddy, this red is so much brighter than my old one, and there's purple and gold." As Lily began drawing with intense concentration, Sarah found herself sitting in the chair across from David. Up close, she could see the exhaustion etched in his face, the worry lines that had probably deepened over the past few days. But she could also see something else, a gentleness in the way he watched his daughter, a quiet strength that reminded her why she'd made her decision to help them. "You read to her?" Sarah asked, nodding toward the space book. "Every night," David replied. "She wants to be an astronaut, has since she was 6. She can tell you everything about the solar system, and half of it goes right over my head." "Did you know," Lily piped up without looking up from her drawing, "that if you could drive a car to the sun, it would take you over 100 years? And that's if you never stopped for gas or bathroom breaks." Sarah laughed, genuinely delighted. "I did not know that. That's fascinating." "Daddy doesn't know most of the space facts I tell him, but he listens anyway," Lily continued matter-of-factly. "He's really good at listening. and he makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the whole world. Except we haven't had those in a while because the stove in our apartment is broken. David's face colored slightly, and Sarah pretended not to notice the information about their living situation. Instead, she leaned forward to look at Lily's new drawing, this one showing the solar system with remarkable detail for an 8-year-old. "You know, I always wanted to be an astronaut too when I was your age," Sarah said. "But I discovered I get motion sickness just from elevators, so space travel probably wasn't in my future." "Really?" Lily looked up with interest. "What made you want to be a doctor instead?" It was such a simple question, but Sarah found herself pausing. The real answer, that she'd become a doctor to prove she was more than her father's money, wasn't appropriate for an 8-year-old. But looking at Lily's earnest expression, she found herself wanting to give an honest answer. "I wanted to fix things that were broken," Sarah said finally. "When I was little, I always felt sad when people were hurt or sick, and I thought being a doctor would mean I could make them better." "That's exactly what you did for me," Lily said, with the absolute certainty that only children possess. "You fixed me when I was broken." The words hit Sarah harder than any thanks or praise she'd ever received. She'd performed hundreds of surgeries, saved countless lives, but somehow this 8-year-old's simple gratitude felt more meaningful than all her professional achievements combined. "Dr. Sarah," Lily continued, using the combination of formal and familiar that children loved, "do you want to have lunch with us? Daddy says hospital food is terrible, but I think it's okay. The pudding is actually pretty good." Sarah glanced at David, who shrugged with a small smile. "She's right about the pudding, and you're welcome to join us if you have time." Sarah did have time. She'd rearranged her schedule specifically to check on Lily, but she found herself hesitating. Sharing a meal felt like crossing a line from professional care into something more personal. But looking at Lily's hopeful expression and David's genuine invitation, she couldn't bring herself to say no. "I'd like that," Sarah said, "but only if you let me upgrade the meal situation. I know a place that delivers really good sandwiches." 20 minutes later, they were sharing deli sandwiches and homemade soup, while Lily regaled them with stories about her classmates and her favorite teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez. Sarah found herself laughing more than she had in months, charmed by Lily's observations about everything from why hospital beds had so many buttons to her theory that clouds were actually sky sheep. "Daddy used to tell me stories about sky sheep when I was little," Lily explained to Sarah, "but now I know they're really water vapor, which is almost as interesting." "Almost," David agreed with a grin, "but the sky sheep stories were definitely more fun." "Will you tell Dr. Sarah about the sky sheep who lost her way?" Lily asked. "It's my favorite." David looked embarrassed. "I'm not much of a storyteller." "Please," both Lily and Sarah said at the same time, then looked at each other and laughed. "All right," David relented. "But don't blame me if it's not very good." He began to tell a story about a young sky sheep who wandered away from her flock and got lost in a thunderstorm, but found her way home by following the light from a lighthouse. It was a simple story, clearly improvised over time, but David told it with such warmth and expression that Sarah found herself completely absorbed. She could picture him at Lily's bedside, spinning tales to chase away nightmares or boredom. "And that's why," David concluded, "whenever you see a cloud shaped like a sheep, you know she made it home safely." "I still look for sheep clouds," Lily admitted to Sarah, "even though I know it's not scientifically accurate." "Some things don't have to be scientifically accurate to be true," Sarah said softly, surprising herself with the sentiment. "They just have to make you feel better." After lunch, Lily began to get tired, a normal part of recovery, but she insisted on showing Sarah her collection of drawings from the past few days. There were pictures of their apartment, David at work, her school, and several of the hospital with various stick-figure doctors and nurses. "This one's my favorite," Lily said, holding up a drawing of 3 figures standing together outside a building. "It's me and Daddy and you. We're friends now, right?" Sarah looked at the drawing, 2 taller figures flanking a smaller one, all holding hands under a bright yellow sun. In Lily's 8-year-old artistic vision, they looked like a family. "Yes," Sarah said quietly, "we're friends." As visiting hours ended and Sarah prepared to leave, Lily caught her hand. "Dr. Sarah, will you come back tomorrow? Not because you have to for doctor reasons, but because you want to." Sarah looked down at this remarkable little girl who'd somehow managed to create a space in her carefully controlled life in just a few days. Then she looked at David, who was watching the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. "I'd like that very much," Sarah said. "Maybe you can teach me more about space sheep and astronomy." "It's a deal," Lily said solemnly, as if they were signing a formal contract. Walking back to her office that evening, Sarah realized something had shifted fundamentally in her world. For years, she'd been searching for meaning in her work, trying to prove herself worthy of her position and her calling. But sitting in that hospital room, sharing sandwiches and stories, she'd felt more like herself than she had in months. She was playing a dangerous game, she knew. Getting emotionally involved with patients and their families was exactly what medical school had warned against. But as she thought about Lily's laugh and David's gentle strength, Sarah couldn't bring herself to care about professional boundaries. For the first time in her adult life, she was looking forward to tomorrow, not because of a challenging surgery or a professional achievement, but because she'd promised an 8-year-old girl she'd come back. And somehow, that felt like the most important promise she'd ever made. 2 weeks after Lily's discharge from the hospital, Sarah found herself standing outside a weathered apartment building in a neighborhood she'd driven through but never really noticed. The GPS on her phone confirmed she was at the right address, but she double-checked the text message David had sent her with the apartment number, 3B, 3rd floor, according to the faded numbers painted on the brick exterior. Sarah had been visiting Lily in the hospital every day during her recovery, and what had started as professional follow-up had evolved into something neither she nor David had quite named. They'd fallen into an easy routine. Sarah would stop by after her morning rounds, sometimes bringing coffee for David or new books for Lily, and they'd spend an hour talking about everything and nothing. Lily's quick recovery had been remarkable, but her discharge had left an unexpected void in Sarah's carefully structured days. When David had shyly invited her to Lily's welcome home dinner, Sarah had accepted before considering the implications. Now, standing on the cracked sidewalk in her Audi A6, she realized how different her world was from theirs. The luxury sedan stood out like a beacon among the older, more practical cars parked along the street. She locked it with a slight wince, hoping it wouldn't draw unwanted attention. The building's entrance required a buzz-in system that had clearly seen better days. Sarah pressed the button for 3B and heard David's voice crackle through the ancient intercom. "Sarah, come on up. The elevator's broken, but it's just 3 flights." The stairwell smelled of cleaning products and something that might have been curry from one of the other apartments. As Sarah climbed, she could hear fragments of life through thin walls, a television program in Spanish, a baby crying, someone practicing piano with more enthusiasm than skill. It was a symphony of ordinary life that felt completely foreign to someone who lived in a downtown high-rise where the soundproofing meant she rarely heard her neighbors. David was waiting at the open door of 3B, wearing jeans and a button-down shirt that looked freshly ironed. "You found us," he said with a smile that seemed slightly nervous. "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for inviting me," Sarah replied, following him into the apartment. The space was small, smaller than Sarah's walk-in closet, but it was immaculately clean and filled with warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. The living room and kitchen were essentially one room, with a small table that had clearly been set with special care. Mismatched plates and glasses were arranged with napkins that looked like they'd been folded with attention to detail. A vase in the center held flowers that Sarah recognized from the hospital gift shop. "Dr. Sarah!" Lily appeared from what must have been the bedroom, practically bouncing with excitement, despite the healing surgical scar beneath her bright yellow dress. "You came! Daddy made your favorite." "My favorite?" Sarah asked, amused. "Grilled cheese and tomato soup," Lily announced proudly. "You said you loved comfort food when we were talking at the hospital, so Daddy went to 3 different stores to find the good cheese. The kind that melts really well." Sarah felt a pang of something she couldn't quite identify. She'd mentioned comfort food in passing during one of their conversations, probably while discussing Lily's appetite during recovery. The fact that David had remembered such an offhand comment and planned an entire meal around it touched her in a way that expensive restaurant dinners never had. "That sounds perfect," Sarah said sincerely, "though you didn't need to go to any trouble." "No trouble," David said. though Sarah caught him glancing at what looked like a grocery receipt on the counter. Even grilled cheese ingredients were probably a stretch for their budget, and the knowledge made her stomach twist with guilt about her casual acceptance of the invitation. "Can I show you my room?" Lily asked eagerly. "Daddy says I can't stay up too late because I'm still recovering, but I want you to see my space collection before dinner." Lily's bedroom was tiny but organized with military precision. A twin bed with a colorful quilt took up most of the space, and the walls were covered with drawings of planets, rockets, and astronauts. On a small desk, clearly David's work, from the careful sanding and fresh paint, Lily had arranged library books about space exploration alongside the art supplies Sarah had given her at the hospital. "This is where I do my homework and practice drawing," Lily explained, "and this is my space corner." She pointed to a section of wall where she'd created a solar system mural using construction paper and crayons. "I know Mercury isn't really that big compared to Jupiter, but I ran out of space on the wall." "It's wonderful," Sarah said, meaning it. "You've put so much detail into everything." "Daddy helped me hang everything up. He's really good at making sure pictures are straight." Lily lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He uses this little tool that has a bubble in it." "A level," Sarah supplied with a smile. "Right. He's really good at building things. He built my desk from scratch because the ones at the store were too expensive." Lily said this matter-of-factly, without any shame or self-consciousness about their financial limitations. As they returned to the living room for dinner, Sarah noticed details she'd missed on first glance. The couch was second-hand but carefully maintained, with throws strategically placed to hide worn spots. The television was old but functional, positioned so both the living room and kitchen table had good viewing angles in the small space. Everything spoke of making do with very little while maintaining dignity and warmth. David had outdone himself with dinner. The grilled cheese sandwiches were perfectly golden, made with what Sarah could tell was good cheddar and butter, not margarine. The tomato soup was homemade, not from a can, and he'd somehow managed to make the simple meal feel special without being pretentious. "This is incredible," Sarah said after her first bite. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" David looked pleased but embarrassed by the praise. "My wife, Lily's mom, she was the real cook in the family. I learned by necessity after. Lily deserves good meals, even if they're simple ones." "Daddy makes the best pancakes too," Lily chimed in. "He puts blueberries in them sometimes, when they're on sale." As they ate, Lily regaled Sarah with stories from her first day back at school. Her classmates had been fascinated by her surgical scar and her tales of the hospital, and her teacher had asked her to do a presentation about her experience for the class. "I told them all about you," Lily said to Sarah, "how you saved my life and how you're the smartest doctor in the whole hospital." "I'm sure there are smarter doctors than me," Sarah said modestly. "Impossible," Lily declared with 8-year-old certainty. "You fixed me when I was broken. That makes you the smartest." After dinner, they settled on the couch to watch a documentary about the International Space Station that Lily had been excited to share. Sarah found herself wedged comfortably between David and Lily, feeling more relaxed than she had in months. The documentary was fascinating, but she found herself equally absorbed in watching Lily's animated reactions to each new piece of information and David's patient answers to his daughter's constant questions. "Did you know that astronauts have to exercise 2 hours every day in space?" Lily asked during a commercial break. "Otherwise, their muscles get weak because there's no gravity." "I didn't know that," Sarah replied. "That's amazing." "I'm going to start exercising now, so I'll be ready when I become an astronaut," Lily announced. "Daddy, will you help me make an exercise plan?" "Of course, kiddo," David said, ruffling her hair. "Though maybe we should wait until Dr. Sarah clears you for vigorous activity." "Speaking of which," Sarah said, "I should probably check your incision site while I'm here. Make sure everything's healing properly." They moved to Lily's bedroom, where Sarah carefully examined the surgical site. The healing was progressing beautifully. No signs of infection, minimal scarring, and Lily's range of motion was already back to normal. "Everything looks perfect," Sarah announced. "You're healing like a champion." "Does that mean I can go back to regular activities?" Lily asked hopefully. "Gentle activities, yes. No contact sports or heavy lifting for another few weeks, but normal kid stuff should be fine." As they returned to the living room, Sarah's phone chimed with a text message. She glanced at it automatically and froze. The message was from her father's assistant, reminding her about a charity gala the following weekend that the Morgan Foundation was hosting. The kind of event where tickets cost more than David probably made in a month, where she'd be expected to make an appearance and smile for photographs, while wealthy donors congratulated themselves on their philanthropy. "Everything okay?" David asked, noticing her expression. "Just work stuff," Sarah said quickly, putting her phone away. But the text had served as a jarring reminder of the two different worlds she was inhabiting. As the evening wound down, Lily began to show signs of tiredness, despite her protests that she wasn't ready for bed. David noticed immediately, the way good parents do, and began the gentle process of transitioning her toward bedtime. "Can Dr. Sarah read me a story?" Lily asked as David walked her to the bathroom to brush her teeth. "Dr. Sarah has probably had a long day," David said diplomatically. "Maybe another time." "I'd love to," Sarah said quickly. "If that's okay with you." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself sitting on the edge of Lily's bed, reading from a picture book about a young girl who dreams of becoming an astronaut. Lily listened with rapt attention, occasionally interrupting to point out scientific inaccuracies in the illustrations or to share related facts she'd learned from her library books. "You're a good story reader," Lily said sleepily as Sarah finished the book. "You use different voices for the characters, like Daddy does." "Thank you. That's a very nice compliment." "Dr. Sarah?" Lily's voice was getting drowsy. "Are you going to keep being our friend even now that I'm all better?" The question caught Sarah off guard with its directness and vulnerability. "I'd like that very much," she said softly. "If you and your daddy want me to be." "We do," Lily said with certainty. "Daddy smiles more when you're here, and you make me feel like having a big sister might feel like." Sarah felt her throat tighten. "That's the nicest thing anyone's ever said to me." As Lily drifted off to sleep, Sarah returned to the living room where David was cleaning up from dinner. She moved to help automatically, but he waved her away. "You're a guest," he said. "Besides, there's not much to clean up." "David," Sarah said, settling back on the couch, "can I ask you something personal?" He paused in his dishwashing, looking slightly wary. "Sure. How do you do it? Raise Lily on your own? Work full-time? Keep everything together? You make it look so easy, but I know it can't be." David was quiet for a long moment, drying a plate with more attention than necessary. "I don't have a choice," he said finally. "Lily needs me to keep it together, so I do. Some days are harder than others, but she's worth it. She's worth everything." "She's lucky to have you," Sarah said. "I'm the lucky one," David replied. "She saved my life as much as I saved hers. After Sarah, my wife, died, I didn't know how to keep going, but Lily needed me, so I figured it out." They fell into comfortable silence, the kind that felt natural rather than awkward. Sarah found herself studying the apartment with new eyes, seeing not what was missing, but what was present. Love, warmth, purpose, family, things that couldn't be bought or inherited. "I should probably head home," Sarah said reluctantly as the clock approached 10. "Early surgery tomorrow." "Of course," David said quickly. "Thank you for coming. It meant a lot to Lily, to both of us." As Sarah gathered her purse and coat, she caught sight of herself in a small mirror by the door. She looked different somehow, more relaxed, less polished, happier. The realization was both comforting and unsettling. "Sarah," David said as she reached the door, "I hope this isn't weird to say, but you're different than I expected." "Different how?" she asked curiously. "Warmer, more real. When you're at the hospital, you're obviously incredibly competent and professional, but here, you just seem more like yourself." It was an astute observation, and Sarah wondered what it said about her that she felt more authentic in this tiny apartment than she did in most other places in her life. "Maybe that's because this feels more real than most places I spend time," she said honestly. Walking back to her car, Sarah felt the weight of the evening settling around her. She'd crossed a line tonight, moving from professional courtesy into genuine friendship, maybe something more. But as she started her car and pulled away from the curb, she realized she didn't want to go back to the safe distance of doctor-patient relationships. For the first time in years, Sarah Morgan felt like she was exactly where she belonged. But as her phone chimed again with another message from her father's world, this one about a board meeting she was expected to attend, Sarah wondered how long she could keep living in both worlds without having to choose between them. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah's dinner at David and Lily's apartment, and those weeks had established a pattern that felt as natural as breathing. Sarah would stop by after her shifts, sometimes bringing takeout from restaurants that David would never have considered affordable, other times content to share whatever simple meal he'd prepared. Lily had appointed herself as Sarah's official guide to everything from proper crayon technique to the finer points of space exploration, and Sarah found herself looking forward to these lessons more than any medical conference or professional development seminar. It was a Thursday evening in late October when everything changed. Sarah had promised Lily she'd help with a school project about the human circulatory system, a topic that seemed tailor-made for a cardiac surgeon's expertise. She'd even stopped by a medical supply store to pick up a model heart that Lily could use for her presentation. David was working a late shift at the shipyard, covering for a colleague who'd called in sick, so Sarah had arranged to meet them at the hospital after David picked Lily up from her after-school program. They'd planned to grab dinner in the hospital cafeteria. Not exactly gourmet dining, but Lily loved the chocolate pudding, and it was convenient for all of them. Sarah was reviewing patient charts in her office when her assistant knocked on the door frame. "Dr. Morgan, your father is here to see you." Sarah's blood ran cold. "My father? Here? Now?" "He's in the main lobby with what looks like a full entourage. Security, assistants, maybe some board members. They're asking for directions to your office." Sarah's mind raced. Richard Morgan never made unannounced visits to St. Mary's. When he conducted business with hospitals, it was always formal, scheduled, with advance notice and carefully orchestrated meetings. For him to show up without warning could only mean one thing. He'd discovered something he didn't like. "Tell him I'll meet him in conference room A in 5 minutes, Sarah said quickly, "and clear the corridor. I don't want him disrupting patient care." But even as she said it, Sarah knew it was too late for damage control. Richard Morgan's presence at St. Mary's was like a thunderstorm in a clear sky, impossible to ignore and bound to leave destruction in its wake. Conference room A was the hospital's most formal meeting space, typically reserved for board meetings and serious administrative discussions. Sarah arrived to find her father standing at the head of the table in his perfectly tailored suit, flanked by 2 men she recognized as executives from Morgan Healthcare Group, and a woman who was probably from the legal department. The scene looked like a corporate hostile takeover, which, Sarah realized with growing dread, might not be far from the truth. "Hello, Father," Sarah said, keeping her voice professionally neutral as she closed the door behind her. Sarah. Richard Morgan was 62 years old, with silver hair that had never been out of place and eyes that missed nothing. He'd built his healthcare empire through a combination of shrewd business acumen and an ability to identify weaknesses in others before they could be exploited. Looking at him now, Sarah could see that same calculating expression focused entirely on her. "To what do I owe the pleasure of this unexpected visit?" Sarah asked, remaining standing rather than taking a seat at the table. "I think you know exactly why I'm here," Richard replied, "though perhaps we should start with what you think you've been doing for the past month." Sarah felt her stomach drop, but she kept her expression neutral. "I've been doing my job, surgery, patient care, the work I was hired to do. Is that what you call it?" Richard pulled out a tablet and set it on the table, swiping to what looked like a financial document. "Because according to the hospital's billing department, you've been doing quite a bit more than surgery. Would you care to explain why you personally guaranteed payment for a $50,000 emergency procedure for a patient named Lily Chen?" There it was. Sarah had known this moment would come eventually. Her father's network of contacts and financial oversight made it impossible to hide significant expenditures indefinitely. But she'd hoped for more time, hoped to find a way to explain the situation that wouldn't result in exactly this confrontation. "The patient needed emergency surgery," Sarah said carefully. "The family couldn't afford the procedure, and delaying treatment would have resulted in serious complications or death. And hospital charity care wasn't sufficient. The paperwork would have taken too long. The patient was an 8-year-old girl with internal bleeding. Every minute counted." Richard nodded slowly, as if Sarah had confirmed something he'd suspected. "An 8-year-old girl named Lily Chen, whose father is David Chen, a welder at Peninsula Shipyard, making approximately $32,000 annually." He swiped to another screen. A man with no college education, no substantial assets, and significant medical debt from his deceased wife's cancer treatment. The clinical way her father recited the details of David and Lily's life made Sarah feel sick. She could picture him or his investigators digging through their personal information, reducing their struggles to data points in a financial analysis. "What's your point, Father?" "My point," Richard said, standing and walking around the table toward her, "is that my daughter, a Harvard-educated cardiac surgeon with a trust fund worth $12 million, has been playing house with a working-class single father and pretending to be something she's not." "I haven't been pretending anything," Sarah said, but even as she spoke, she knew it wasn't entirely true. She'd been careful not to mention her background, her family connections, her financial situation. Not lying, perhaps, but certainly not being completely honest either. "Haven't you?" Richard pulled out his phone and showed her what appeared to be surveillance photos, images of her visiting David and Lily's apartment, of the three of them walking together near the hospital, of her car parked outside their building. "You've been visiting their apartment regularly, sharing meals, developing what appears to be a romantic relationship with Mr. Chen, all while hiding your true identity and financial status." Sarah stared at the photos, feeling violated and furious. "You had me followed?" "I had my investment protected," Richard corrected. "You're my daughter, Sarah. Your reputation affects the Morgan name, the foundation, the entire healthcare network we've built. When you start making questionable financial decisions and associating with people who could potentially exploit your position." "Exploit?" Sarah's voice rose despite her efforts to remain calm. "David doesn't even know about my family's money. He's never asked me for anything. He's been trying to find ways to pay me back for Lily's surgery." "Which only proves how naive you're being," Richard said dismissively. "Do you really think it's a coincidence that a single father with crushing medical debt happened to encounter my daughter at exactly the right moment? That his daughter just happened to need the exact kind of surgery you specialize in?" The implication hit Sarah like a physical blow. "You think David orchestrated his daughter's car accident? You think he arranged for a drunk driver to nearly kill his child so he could meet me?" "I think desperate people do desperate things," Richard replied coldly. "And I think you're too emotionally involved to see the situation clearly." Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the conference room door. Without waiting for permission, Dr. Harrison entered, looking flustered and apologetic. "Dr. Morgan, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a situation in the lobby. A Mr. Chen is here with his daughter asking to see you, and security isn't sure how to handle it, given—" He gestured vaguely toward Richard and his entourage. Sarah's heart sank. David and Lily had arrived for their planned meeting, walking directly into the worst possible situation. "Excellent timing," Richard said, with the kind of smile that never reached his eyes. "Bring them up, Dr. Harrison. I think it's time for everyone to have a frank conversation about the situation." "Father, no," Sarah said quickly. "Leave them out of this. Whatever issues you have with my decisions, take them up with me directly." "I'm afraid it's too late for that," Richard replied. "Dr. Harrison, please escort Mr. Chen and his daughter to this conference room immediately." Dr. Harrison looked between Sarah and her father, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in his hospital. But Richard Morgan's authority in healthcare circles was undeniable, and after a moment's hesitation, he nodded and left to fetch David and Lily. Sarah's mind raced, trying to think of a way to minimize the damage that was about to occur. She could try to get David and Lily out of the building before they reached the conference room, but her father's security team would likely prevent that. She could attempt to explain the situation quickly before her father took control of the conversation, but there wasn't enough time to provide context that would make any of this make sense. 5 minutes later, Dr. Harrison returned with David and Lily. David was still wearing his work clothes, jeans and a shirt with the shipyard logo, and he carried Lily's school backpack in one hand while she held his other hand. They both looked slightly confused by the formal escort to a conference room, but Lily's face lit up when she saw Sarah. "Dr. Sarah!" Lily rushed forward, nearly knocking over a chair in her excitement. "We brought the model heart you got me. I can't wait to show you how I'm going to use it for my presentation." Sarah's heart broke watching Lily's innocent enthusiasm, knowing it was about to be destroyed by whatever her father had planned. "Lily," Sarah said gently, "I'd like you to meet my father, Richard Morgan. Father, this is Lily Chen and her father, David." Richard stepped forward with the practiced charm he used in business settings, extending his hand to David with a smile that was all surface polish. "Mr. Chen, how lovely to finally meet you. I've heard so much about you and your daughter." David shook the offered hand, but Sarah could see the confusion in his expression. "Nice to meet you, sir. Sarah didn't mention her father would be here tonight." "I'm sure there are many things Sarah hasn't mentioned," Richard said smoothly. "Please, have a seat. I think it's time we all had an honest conversation." David glanced at Sarah, clearly picking up on the tension in the room, despite not understanding its source. "Is everything okay? We can reschedule if this is a bad time." "No, please stay," Richard insisted, gesturing toward the chairs around the conference table. "I think you'll find this conversation quite illuminating." Sarah watched helplessly as David and Lily took seats at the table, Lily swinging her legs from a chair that was too tall for her, while looking around the formal conference room with curious eyes. "Mr. Chen," Richard began, settling back into his position at the head of the table, "what do you know about my daughter's background?" David looked confused by the question. "I know she's an incredible surgeon. She saved Lily's life and has been, well, she's been a wonderful friend to both of us. But what do you know about her family, her upbringing, her financial situation?" Sarah could see David growing uncomfortable with the line of questioning. "With respect, sir, I don't see how that's relevant. Sarah is a good person and a great doctor. That's what matters to me." "I see," Richard said, nodding as if David had confirmed something significant. "So you had no idea that my daughter is the heir to the Morgan Healthcare Group fortune? That her trust fund is worth $12 million? That the Morgan Foundation has donated over $50 million to hospitals and medical research facilities across the country?" The color drained from David's face as the implications of what Richard was saying sank in. Sarah watched him process the information, saw the exact moment when understanding hit him like a physical blow. "12 million?" David repeated quietly, looking at Sarah with an expression of hurt and confusion that cut her to the core. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was small and uncertain. "What's 12 million?" "It's a lot of money, sweetheart," David said automatically, never taking his eyes off Sarah. "A lot more money than we'll ever have." "So, you see, Mr. Chen," Richard continued relentlessly, "my daughter has been, shall we say, economical with the truth about her circumstances. The question is, what did you hope to gain from this association once you discovered her true identity?" "I didn't know," David said flatly. "I had no idea." "Come now," Richard's voice took on a skeptical tone. "You expect me to believe that you never questioned how a hospital physician could afford to personally guarantee a $50,000 surgery? That you never wondered about her expensive car, her designer clothes, her ability to pay for elaborate takeout dinners?" Sarah watched David's face as her father's words hit their mark. She could see him remembering details he'd noticed but not questioned. Her car, her clothes, the casual way she'd offered to pay for Lily's surgery, the expensive art supplies she'd brought to the hospital. Things that should have been obvious indicators of wealth that he'd either missed or chosen to ignore. "I thought she was just generous," David said quietly. "I thought she cared about Lily." "I do care about Lily," Sarah said desperately. "I care about both of you. The money doesn't change that." "Doesn't it?" David stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "You've been lying to us for weeks, Sarah, letting us worry about paying you back, letting me stress about affording dinners when you probably spend more on lunch than I make in a week." "I never lied," Sarah protested. "I just didn't—" "You didn't tell the truth," David interrupted, "which amounts to the same thing." He turned to Richard. "Mr. Morgan, I don't know what you think I was trying to accomplish, but I can assure you I never had any intention of taking advantage of your daughter. I didn't even know she was your daughter." "Perhaps not," Richard conceded, "but intentions can change when people discover new information about potential opportunities." The cynicism in her father's voice made Sarah want to scream. "He's not like that," she said firmly. "David isn't interested in money or opportunities. He's interested in taking care of his daughter and building a good life for her." "Everyone's interested in money when they have as little of it as Mr. Chen does," Richard replied coldly. David's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You're right," he said to Richard. "I don't have money. I work with my hands, I live paycheck to paycheck, and I worry every month about making rent. But I've never taken charity I didn't earn, and I've never lied to people about who I am." The words hit Sarah like a slap. She could see the hurt in David's eyes, the sense of betrayal that went beyond mere deception. She'd allowed him to feel grateful to her, to worry about repaying her, to treat her as an equal when she'd known all along that the playing field was anything but level. "Daddy?" Lily's voice was confused and scared. "Why is everyone upset? Did I do something wrong?" The sight of Lily, innocent, frightened, caught in the middle of an adult conflict she couldn't understand, seemed to galvanize David. He moved to his daughter's chair and helped her down, gathering her backpack with careful precision. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "You didn't do anything wrong, but we need to go home now." "But what about my project?" Lily asked, looking at the model heart she'd been so excited to show Sarah. "Dr. Sarah was going to help me." "Dr. Sarah is very busy," David said, his voice carefully controlled. "I'm sure she has more important things to do than help with school projects." The dismissal in his tone was worse than shouting would have been. Sarah stood up, reaching toward them. "David, please, let me explain. "There's nothing to explain," David said, not looking at her. "You're exactly who you are, and I'm exactly who I am. I should have known better than to think those two things could coexist." "But we're friends," Lily said, looking between the adults with growing distress. "Dr. Sarah is our friend, right, Dr. Sarah?" Sarah looked at this beautiful, trusting child who'd called her a superhero, who'd drawn pictures of them as a family, who'd made her feel like she belonged somewhere for the first time in her life. "I hope so," Sarah said softly. "I hope I always will be." But even as she said it, Sarah could see in David's expression that their friendship, whatever it had been or might have become, was over. Richard Morgan had succeeded in exposing the fundamental incompatibility between their worlds, and there was no going back from that revelation. As David and Lily left the conference room, Lily turned back once to wave at Sarah with the unconscious trust of a child who still believed that adults could fix anything that was broken. Sarah waved back, knowing that some things, once shattered, could never be repaired, no matter how skilled the surgeon or how much money was available to pay for the operation. The conference room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of hospital life continuing around them. Richard Morgan straightened his tie and began gathering his papers with the satisfaction of a man who'd handled an unpleasant but necessary task. "That could have gone worse," he said conversationally. "Mr. Chen seems like a decent enough man, all things considered. He'll recover from his disappointment and find someone more appropriate to his station." Sarah stared at her father, feeling like she was seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "You destroyed something beautiful," she said quietly. "I prevented a disaster," Richard corrected. "You'll thank me eventually, when you're thinking more clearly." But as Sarah watched through the conference room window, as David and Lily disappeared into the elevator, she knew that thinking clearly had never felt more like the opposite of wisdom. For the first time in her life, Sarah Morgan understood the true cost of the fortune that bore her name, and she wasn't sure it was a price she was willing to keep paying. The silence in Sarah's downtown condo that night was deafening. She sat on her leather couch, staring out at the city lights that had once felt like diamonds scattered across velvet, but now seemed cold and distant. Her phone lay beside her, the contact entry for David Chen displayed on the screen, but her thumb hovered over the call button without pressing it. What could she possibly say that would undo the damage her father had inflicted in that conference room? 3 days had passed since the confrontation, 3 days during which Sarah had functioned on autopilot, performing surgeries with mechanical precision, attending meetings where her mind wandered, eating meals she couldn't taste. Her colleagues had noticed her distraction, but attributed it to stress or fatigue. None of them knew that Dr. Sarah Morgan, one of the city's most respected cardiac surgeons, was falling apart over a relationship that had never been properly defined. She'd driven past David and Lily's apartment building twice, circling the block like a stalker, before forcing herself to continue home. She'd composed dozens of text messages, but deleted them all. She'd even purchased a children's astronomy book for Lily, before realizing that any gift from her would now be tainted by the knowledge of what she could afford. On Thursday morning, Sarah's assistant knocked on her office door with an expression of concern that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Dr. Morgan, there's a call for you on line 3. It's Peninsula Elementary School asking for Lily Chen's emergency contact information. Sarah's blood ran cold. Did they say why? Something about Lily being sick at school and they can't reach her father. Sarah was already reaching for the phone before her assistant finished speaking. "This is Dr. Morgan," she said into the receiver, her heart pounding. "Dr. Morgan, this is Nancy Rodriguez, the school nurse at Peninsula Elementary. I have Lily Chen here in my office, and she's been complaining of severe abdominal pain for the past hour. Her father isn't answering his work phone, and you're listed as her secondary emergency contact. I think she might need medical attention." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Abdominal pain in a recent surgical patient could indicate any number of complications: infection, adhesions, internal bleeding. How severe is the pain? Can you describe her symptoms? She's curled up in a ball, crying. She says it feels like her surgery scar is pulling apart inside. Her temperature is slightly elevated, and she's been nauseous. Sarah was already grabbing her coat and keys. "I'm coming to get her right now. Don't let her eat or drink anything, and if her condition worsens in any way, call an ambulance immediately." "Dr. Morgan, should I keep trying to reach her father?" Sarah paused, one arm in her coat sleeve. In the 3 days since their confrontation, David had made it clear that he wanted nothing to do with her. Taking Lily to the hospital without his knowledge or consent could be seen as overstepping boundaries, maybe even as kidnapping. But if Lily was experiencing surgical complications, every minute could matter. "Keep trying to reach him," Sarah said finally. "But I'm coming regardless. Lily's health is the priority." The drive to Peninsula Elementary took 17 minutes that felt like hours. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Adhesions were common after abdominal surgery, but usually developed weeks or months later. Infection was always a risk, though Lily's incision had been healing beautifully at her last check. Internal bleeding was the most serious possibility, and the one that would require immediate surgical intervention. Peninsula Elementary was a modest brick building in the same neighborhood as David and Lily's apartment, surrounded by a playground with equipment that had clearly seen better days. Sarah had never been there before, but she'd heard Lily describe it in loving detail: the art room where she worked on projects, the library where she checked out astronomy books, the cafeteria where she ate lunch with her friend Madison. The school nurse, Mrs. Rodriguez, was waiting for her at the main entrance. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd seen every childhood ailment imaginable. "Dr. Morgan, thank you for coming so quickly. Lily's been asking for you." Sarah followed Mrs. Rodriguez through hallways lined with colorful student artwork and motivational posters. The school smelled like cleaning supplies and cafeteria food, with an underlying scent of childhood that Sarah remembered from her own elementary years. Though her private school had been considerably more luxurious than this one, Lily was curled up on a small cot in the nurse's office, her face pale and streaked with tears. When she saw Sarah, her expression shifted from pain to relief. "Dr. Sarah," she whispered, "my tummy hurts really bad. It feels like it did before, when I was in the car accident." Sarah knelt beside the cot, her heart breaking at the sight of Lily in pain. "Can you show me exactly where it hurts, sweetheart?" Lily pointed to her lower abdomen, near but not exactly at the site of her surgical incision. Sarah gently palpated the area, noting the tenderness and slight swelling that hadn't been present at Lily's last follow-up appointment. "Mrs. Rodriguez, have you been able to reach Lily's father? I've left 3 messages at the shipyard. They said he's working on a project that requires him to be away from his phone, but they're trying to locate him." Sarah made a decision that she knew could have serious consequences. "I'm taking Lily to St. Mary's for evaluation. This could be a surgical complication that needs immediate attention. Should I wait for her father's permission? If this is what I think it might be, waiting could be dangerous." Sarah turned back to Lily. "Honey, I need to take you to the hospital so we can figure out why your tummy hurts. Is that okay?" Lily nodded weakly. "Will you stay with me? I'm scared." "I'll stay with you," Sarah promised, carefully lifting Lily from the cot. "Everything's going to be okay." The drive to St. Mary's was tense. Lily dozed fitfully in the back seat, occasionally whimpering with pain, while Sarah pushed her Audi through traffic with the kind of controlled urgency she'd perfected during her residency. She called ahead to the emergency department, alerting them to prepare for a possible surgical complication in a pediatric patient. Dr. Harrison met them at the emergency entrance with a wheelchair and a concerned expression. "What do we have, Dr. Morgan?" 8-year-old post-op patient, 3-week status post-splenectomy and liver repair, presenting with acute abdominal pain and low-grade fever. I'm concerned about adhesions or possible infection. As they rushed Lily into a trauma bay, Sarah caught Dr. Harrison's questioning look. "Where's the father?" "Unreachable at work. I'm listed as emergency contact, and this couldn't wait." "Doctor?" Harrison nodded, understanding the medical imperative, even if the family dynamics were complicated. "Let's get her into radiology for a CT scan." The next hour passed in a blur of medical procedures and mounting anxiety. The CT scan revealed what Sarah had feared. Adhesions had formed around Lily's surgical site, creating a partial bowel obstruction that was causing her pain and nausea. It wasn't immediately life-threatening, but it would require surgical intervention within the next few hours. Sarah was reviewing the scan results when she heard David's voice in the hallway outside the trauma bay, raised and agitated. "Where is she? Where's my daughter?" Sarah steeled herself and walked out to meet him. David was still wearing his work clothes, his face streaked with sweat and grease, his expression wild with panic and fury. "David!" Sarah began, but he cut her off immediately. "Don't!" His voice was cold and controlled in a way that was somehow worse than shouting. "Don't say my name like we're friends. Just tell me what's wrong with Lily and why you took her from school without my permission." "She has adhesions from her surgery," Sarah said, keeping her voice professional despite the hurt in her chest. "Scar tissue that's formed around her intestines, causing a partial obstruction. She needs surgery to remove them." David's face went white. "Surgery? Again?" "It's a relatively simple procedure, laparoscopic, minimally invasive. But it does need to be done soon to prevent the obstruction from becoming complete." "And how much is this going to cost?" David asked bitterly. "Another 50,000? 100,000? Should I just sign my entire life over to the hospital now?" The question hit Sarah like a slap, reminding her of the financial burden that medical care represented for families like David's. "David, we can work out the financial arrangements later. Right now, Lily needs her father to make decisions about her care, not some rich doctor who's been lying to us for weeks." The words stung, but Sarah forced herself to remain calm. "You're absolutely right. You're her father, and all medical decisions are yours to make. I was just trying to help." "Like you helped before?" David's voice was thick with emotion. "By paying for surgery without telling us who you really are? By making us feel grateful when you were just playing games?" "I wasn't playing games," Sarah said desperately. "Everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real." "Was it?" David looked at her with eyes that held more hurt than anger. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like a rich woman who got bored with her privileged life decided to play house with the poor people for a few weeks." Before Sarah could respond, a small voice called out from the trauma bay. "Daddy!" David immediately brushed past Sarah and rushed to Lily's side. Sarah followed at a distance, watching as he knelt beside the gurney and took his daughter's hand. "I'm here, baby girl," David said softly, his anger dissolving into concern as he focused on Lily. "How are you feeling?" "My tummy still hurts," Lily said weakly. "But Dr. Sarah says you can fix it with another surgery." David glanced at Sarah, then back at his daughter. "Dr. Sarah isn't going to be doing your surgery, sweetheart. We're going to find another doctor." "But I want Dr. Sarah," Lily protested, her voice getting stronger with distress. "She knows how to fix me. She's the best doctor in the hospital." "Lily," David said gently, "Dr. Sarah is very busy with other patients. We need to let her take care of other people who need her help." Sarah felt her heart breaking as she watched David try to explain a situation that Lily couldn't possibly understand. The little girl looked confused and hurt, glancing between her father and Sarah with the kind of bewilderment that came from adult conflicts invading a child's world. "But we're friends," Lily said, looking directly at Sarah. "You said we'd always be friends. Did I do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah said, stepping closer despite David's obvious reluctance. "You didn't do anything wrong. You're perfect and you're brave, and you're going to be just fine." "Then why can't you do my surgery?" Sarah looked at David, silently asking for permission to explain, but his expression remained closed off. Sometimes, Sarah said carefully. Adults have disagreements that don't have anything to do with kids. Your daddy wants what's best for you, and he thinks another doctor might be better for this surgery. But I trust you, Lily said simply. I don't want another doctor. I want you. The innocence and loyalty in Lily's voice was devastating. Sarah could see David struggling with the conflict between his anger at her and his desire to give his daughter what she wanted. Mr. Chen, Dr. Harrison appeared at the entrance to the trauma bay, clipboard in hand. I need to discuss the surgical options and financial arrangements for your daughter's procedure. David's jaw tightened. How much? The laparoscopic adhesion removal would be approximately $25,000, not including anesthesia, recovery, and potential complications. Sarah watched David process the number, saw the defeat creep into his expression as he realized he was facing another impossible financial burden. And if we don't do the surgery? David asked quietly. The obstruction could worsen, leading to complete bowel blockage, which would require emergency surgery and significantly increase the risk of complications. David closed his eyes, and Sarah could see him calculating options he didn't have, considering choices that weren't really choices at all. Daddy, Lily said softly, are you sad because of the money again? The question broke something in David's carefully maintained composure. Sarah watched him struggle not to cry in front of his daughter, not to let her see how trapped he felt by circumstances beyond his control. I'll guarantee the payment again, Sarah said quietly, just like before. David's eyes snapped open, and the look he gave her was filled with fury and desperation in equal measure. No, he said firmly. We're not taking any more charity from you. It's not charity, it's exactly charity, David interrupted. Rich people paying for poor people's problems because it makes them feel good about themselves. I won't do it anymore. Then what are you going to do? Sarah asked, her professional concern overriding her personal hurt. Let Lily suffer because you're too proud to accept help? The words came out harsher than she'd intended, and she immediately regretted them. David's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Don't you dare question my love for my daughter, he said, his voice shaking. Everything I do is for Lily. Everything I've sacrificed, every choice I've made, it's all been for her. I know that, Sarah said desperately. I'm sorry, I didn't mean... Yes, you did. David stood up, his decision clearly made. You meant exactly what you said. You think I'm a failure as a father because I can't afford to take care of my daughter's medical needs. That's not what I think at all. It doesn't matter what you think, David said with finality. Dr. Harrison, please arrange for another surgeon to perform the procedure. Send the bills to me. I'll figure out a way to pay them. As David turned away from her, Sarah realized that her father had been right about one thing. Money changed everything, even when you tried to pretend it didn't matter. The wealth she'd inherited had created a chasm between her and David that couldn't be bridged by good intentions or genuine feelings. But looking at Lily, pale and frightened on the hospital gurney, Sarah knew that some things were more important than pride or personal relationships, and she was going to make sure Lily got the care she needed, whether David wanted her help or not. The question was whether he would ever forgive her for it. Sarah stood in the hospital parking garage at 2 a.m, her breath forming small clouds in the cold October air. She'd been there for 6 hours, waiting for news about Lily's surgery that she wasn't allowed to observe, performed by a colleague she'd recommended but couldn't assist. Jennifer Walsh was an excellent pediatric surgeon, but Sarah knew Lily's case better than anyone, knew the intricacies of her previous surgery, the way her tissues had healed. The surgery had taken longer than expected, 4 hours instead of the projected 2. Sarah had paced the corridors like a ghost, catching glimpses of David in the family waiting room, but maintaining the distance he'd demanded. She'd watched him sit alone, his head in his hands, turning away the few friends who'd come to offer support. The sight of his isolation had been almost unbearable. When Dr. Walsh had finally emerged from the OR, with news that the surgery had been successful but complicated, Sarah had felt relief and frustration in equal measure. The adhesions had been more extensive than the imaging had shown, requiring a more invasive approach than originally planned. If Sarah had been operating, she would have been prepared for that possibility. She would have anticipated the complications. But she hadn't been operating because David Chen would rather struggle alone than accept help from someone who'd lied to him about who she was. Now, as Sarah sat in her car in the parking garage, she was forced to confront truths about herself that were as uncomfortable as they were undeniable. Her father had been wrong about David's motives. David wasn't interested in exploiting her wealth or her connections. But Richard Morgan had been right about something else. Sarah had been playing a role, pretending to be someone she wasn't, allowing David and Lily to believe in a version of her that didn't exist. She'd told herself she was just being modest about her background, not wanting her family's money to influence how people saw her. But the truth was more complicated than that. Sarah had been living a fantasy, imagining what her life might be like if she were just a doctor instead of an heiress, if she could form relationships based on who she was rather than what she had. The fantasy had been intoxicating while it lasted. Sitting in David and Lily's small apartment, sharing simple meals and honest conversation, Sarah had felt more authentic than she had in years. But authenticity built on a mission wasn't really authenticity at all. It was just another kind of performance, maybe more elaborate than the one she performed at charity galas and board meetings. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message from her father. Board meeting tomorrow at 10 a.m. Morgan Healthcare Group expansion proposal. Your presence required. She stared at the message, then deleted it without responding. Richard Morgan's world of corporate healthcare and strategic philanthropy felt more foreign to her now than it ever had. But David Chen's world, a world where medical bills meant choosing between surgery and financial ruin, felt equally unreachable. Where did that leave her? Caught between two worlds she didn't fully belong to, with a heart that had attached itself to people who no longer wanted her in their lives. Sarah drove home through empty streets, the city looking different in the pre-dawn darkness. The luxury condos and high-end restaurants that normally felt like home now seemed like monuments to a kind of wealth that she was only beginning to understand the true cost of. Her building's doorman greeted her with professional courtesy, and the elevator carried her smoothly to the 20th floor. But the comfort that usually accompanied coming home was nowhere to be found. Her condo felt cavernous and cold. The expensive furniture that had once impressed visitors now seemed impersonal, chosen by an interior designer who'd never asked Sarah what she actually liked. The view of the harbor that had justified the outrageous rent now looked like a pretty picture she couldn't touch. Sarah poured herself a glass of wine she didn't want and sat on her leather couch thinking about Lily's question from weeks ago. "Do you want to have lunch with us?" Such a simple invitation, but it had opened a door to something Sarah hadn't known she was looking for. A sense of belonging that had nothing to do with achievement or status. Her laptop sat open on the coffee table, displaying her bank account information from a financial review she'd been conducting before the evening's crisis. The numbers were staggering. Her trust fund, her investment portfolio, her savings account, the properties she owned but rarely visited. She could pay for Lily's surgery 100 times over without affecting her lifestyle in any meaningful way. But David was right to refuse her help. Accepting it would change the fundamental dynamic between them, would make him dependent on her charity in a way that would poison any genuine relationship they might have had. Sarah had learned enough about David's character to know that he needed to feel like an equal partner in any relationship. Needed to feel like he was contributing something of value rather than just accepting handouts from someone with more money than she knew what to do with. The realization led to another, more painful truth. There might not be a way to bridge the gap between their worlds. Sarah could give up her trust fund, could walk away from her family's money, but she couldn't undo the advantages it had given her, the education, the connections, the opportunities that had shaped her into who she was. And David couldn't suddenly acquire the financial security that would make him feel comfortable accepting her as an equal. But even as Sarah acknowledged these realities, she found herself thinking about something Dr. Walsh had mentioned after the surgery. The adhesions in Lily's abdomen had been more extensive than expected, suggesting that her healing process had been complicated by factors they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes surgical healing went in unexpected directions, but it meant that Lily might need additional monitoring, possibly more procedures down the line. David was facing not just the immediate financial burden of this surgery, but the possibility of ongoing medical expenses that could stretch on for years. Even if he found a way to pay for this procedure, what would happen the next time Lily needed medical care? Would he refuse help again, even if it meant putting his daughter's health at risk? Sarah stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that overlooked the harbor. The sun was beginning to rise, painting the water in shades of pink and gold that would have been beautiful under other circumstances. But all Sarah could think about was an 8-year-old girl recovering from surgery in a hospital room, probably asking for her father and wondering why Dr. Sarah wasn't there to check on her. The thought crystallized something that had been building in Sarah's mind since the confrontation with her father. She'd spent her entire adult life trying to prove that she was more than Richard Morgan's daughter, that she deserved her position based on merit rather than family connections. But maybe the question she should have been asking wasn't how to escape her privilege, but how to use it responsibly. Sarah had been given advantages that David would never have. She'd been born into wealth, educated at the best schools, given opportunities that opened doors before she even knocked on them. She couldn't change those facts, couldn't pretend they weren't part of who she was, but she could choose what to do with the privilege she'd inherited. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number for Marcus Webb, her financial advisor. It was too early to call, but she sent a text message. Need to schedule urgent meeting about restructuring trust fund assets. Available today if possible. The response came back within minutes. Of course, my office at 9 a.m.? Sarah confirmed the appointment, then spent the next few hours researching something she'd never seriously considered before. How to establish a charitable foundation, specifically focused on providing medical care for families who couldn't afford it. Not the kind of high-profile philanthropy her father engaged in, with galas and tax benefits and naming rights, but something more direct and practical. By the time she arrived at Marcus Webb's office downtown, Sarah had the outline of a plan that felt both terrifying and inevitable. Marcus was a man in his 60s who'd been managing the Morgan family finances for decades, and his expression grew increasingly concerned as Sarah explained what she wanted to do. You're talking about converting a significant portion of your trust fund into a medical charity, Marcus said slowly. Sarah, I have to ask if you've thought this through completely. Once you establish this foundation, those assets won't be available for your personal use. I understand that, Sarah replied. But Marcus, I have more money than I could spend in several lifetimes. What's the point of hoarding it when it could actually help people? Your father isn't going to approve of this decision. My father doesn't get to approve or disapprove of my choices anymore, Sarah said firmly. I'm 32 years old, and it's time I started using my privilege for something more meaningful than maintaining a lifestyle I don't even particularly enjoy. Marcus studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, if you're serious about this, I'll draw up the paperwork. But Sarah, you should know that establishing a foundation of this magnitude will draw attention. The medical community, the press, your father's associates. Everyone's going to want to know why Richard Morgan's daughter suddenly decided to become a philanthropist. Let them wonder, Sarah said. I know why I'm doing this, and that's enough. As she left Marcus's office 3 hours later, with a briefcase full of legal documents and financial projections, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks. A sense of purpose that had nothing to do with other people's expectations or approval. She was going to create something that would ensure that families like David and Lily's would never have to choose between medical care and financial security. It wouldn't fix what had gone wrong between her and David. Some things couldn't be repaired with money or good intentions, but it might prevent other families from facing the same impossible choices. And for now, that felt like enough. Sarah drove back to St. Mary's, where Lily was probably waking up from her surgery and asking questions that David would struggle to answer. She wouldn't try to see them. She would respect David's wishes about maintaining distance. But she would make sure that Dr. Walsh had everything she needed to provide the best possible care, and she would begin the process of creating something that could help families like theirs in the future. As she pulled into the hospital parking lot, Sarah realized that for the first time in her life, she was choosing to use her wealth not to escape from reality, but to engage with it more fully. It was a small step toward becoming the person she wanted to be, rather than the person she'd inherited the right to be. And maybe, eventually, it would be enough. Whoa. 2 months had passed since Lily's second surgery, 2 months during which Sarah had thrown herself into establishing the Chen Morgan Foundation for Emergency Medical Care with the kind of obsessive focus she'd once reserved for the most challenging surgical cases. The irony of naming the foundation after the very family that wanted nothing to do with her wasn't lost on Sarah, but she couldn't think of a more fitting tribute to the people who'd taught her what medicine should really be about. The foundation was already operational, quietly paying for emergency medical procedures for families who couldn't afford them, with a staff of social workers and financial coordinators who ensured that recipients never felt like charity cases. Sarah had structured it so that families would never know where the funding came from. They would simply be told that their insurance had covered more than expected, or that a payment plan had been arranged that fit their budget. It was early December when Dr. Walsh called Sarah with news that changed everything. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about Lily Chen," Dr. Walsh said, her voice tense with concern. "I just reviewed her latest CT scan, and there's something you need to see." Sarah was in her office at St. Mary's, reviewing patient charts, but Dr. Walsh's tone made her drop everything. "What kind of something? Can you meet me in radiology in 10 minutes? I'd rather show you than try to explain over the phone." The walk to radiology felt like the longest 10 minutes of Sarah's life. She'd been following Lily's recovery from a distance, getting updates through Dr. Walsh and other colleagues, but she hadn't seen the Chen family since that terrible night in the emergency room. She'd driven past their apartment building countless times, had even seen David from a distance once at the grocery store, but she'd respected his wishes about maintaining separation. Dr. Walsh was waiting for her at the radiology workstation, Lily's CT scan already pulled up on the large monitor. What Sarah saw made her heart stop. "Is that—" Sarah began, then stopped, unable to finish the question. "A mass," Dr. Walsh confirmed grimly, "adjacent to the surgical site from her second operation. It appeared sometime in the last 3 weeks, which means it's growing fast." Sarah studied the image, her medical training warring with her emotional attachment to the patient. The mass was approximately 4 centimeters, irregularly shaped and positioned in a way that would make surgical removal extremely complicated. "Have you told the family?" Sarah asked. "I tried calling David this afternoon, but he hasn't returned my call. Sarah, I think this might be malignant, and if it is, Lily's going to need treatment that goes far beyond what the Chen family can afford." Sarah felt the world shift around her as the implications sank in. If Lily had cancer, she would need chemotherapy, radiation, possibly multiple surgeries. Even with insurance, the costs could easily reach hundreds of thousands of dollars. Without proper treatment, an 8-year-old girl who'd already survived a car accident and 2 surgeries might not survive to see her 9th birthday. "I have to tell them," Sarah said, already moving toward the door. "Sarah, wait," Dr. Walsh called after her. "David Chen made it very clear that he doesn't want you involved in his daughter's care. If you show up with this news—" "Then I'll deal with the consequences," Sarah replied. "But I'm not letting Lily face this without all the support she can get, whether her father likes it or not." The drive to David and Lily's apartment felt like racing toward a disaster she was powerless to prevent. Sarah's hands shook as she gripped the steering wheel, her mind cycling through treatment protocols and survival statistics that painted an increasingly grim picture. Pediatric cancer was treatable, but it required aggressive intervention and resources that the Chen family simply didn't have. Sarah parked outside their building and sat in her car for several minutes, trying to find words for a conversation that no parent should ever have to have. How do you tell a man who's already lost his wife to cancer that his daughter might be facing the same battle? How do you offer help to someone who's made it clear they'd rather struggle alone than accept your assistance? The answer, Sarah realized, was that you didn't ask permission. You simply did what needed to be done. David answered the apartment door, wearing the same wary expression he'd worn since their relationship had imploded. Behind him, Sarah could hear Lily's voice chattering excitedly about a school project, and the sound of that innocent happiness made what she had to say even more devastating. "Sarah," David said, his voice carefully neutral, "what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to you," Sarah said. "It's about Lily." Something in her tone must have conveyed the seriousness of the situation, because David's defensive posture immediately shifted to concern. "Is something wrong? Dr. Walsh called earlier, but I haven't had a chance to call her back." "David, please, can I come in? This isn't a conversation for the hallway." After a moment's hesitation, David stepped aside to let her enter. The apartment looked exactly the same as it had 2 months ago, clean, warm, filled with evidence of the love between father and daughter. Lily was at the kitchen table, surrounded by art supplies and poster board, working on what appeared to be a presentation about marine biology. "Dr. Sarah!" Lily looked up with a smile that nearly broke Sarah's heart. "You came back. I missed you so much. Do you want to see my project about dolphins? Did you know they can recognize themselves in mirrors?" Sarah knelt down beside Lily's chair, drinking in the sight of this remarkable little girl who'd come to mean so much to her. Lily looked healthy and happy, her cheeks flushed with excitement, no visible signs of the threat growing inside her body. "That sounds fascinating," Sarah said, her voice carefully controlled. "Dolphins are incredibly intelligent animals. I know I want to be a marine biologist now, or maybe an astronaut who studies space dolphins. Do you think there could be space dolphins?" "I think," Sarah said softly, "that you could discover space dolphins if anyone could." David had been watching this interaction with a mixture of emotions playing across his face, longing, pain, and something that might have been regret. "Lily, sweetheart, why don't you work on your project in your room for a few minutes? Dr. Sarah and I need to talk." "Adult talk?" Lily asked with the knowing expression of a child who'd heard that phrase many times. "Adult talk," David confirmed. As Lily gathered her art supplies and headed to her bedroom, Sarah and David were left alone in the living room that had once felt like a sanctuary but now felt charged with tension and unresolved hurt. "She looks good," Sarah said, settling onto the couch. "She's been doing well," David replied, remaining standing. "Her recovery from the second surgery was faster than expected. Dr. Walsh says she's healing beautifully." Sarah's heart clenched at the past tense of that assessment. "David, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear all of it before you react." Something in her tone made David sink into the chair across from her, his face already tensing with apprehension. "Dr. Walsh found something on Lily's latest CT scan," Sarah began. "There's a mass near her surgical site. It's growing quickly, and there's a strong possibility that it's malignant." The color drained from David's face. "Cancer?" he whispered. "We don't know for certain yet. We'd need to do a biopsy to confirm, but the characteristics of the mass are concerning. David, if this is cancer, Lily is going to need immediate and aggressive treatment." David buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with the kind of grief that comes from watching history repeat itself in the cruelest possible way. "Not again," he said, his voice muffled. "I can't lose her too. I can't go through this again." Sarah moved to the chair beside him, her own pain at seeing him suffer overriding the distance he'd tried to maintain between them. "You're not going to lose her," she said firmly. "Pediatric cancer has much higher survival rates than adult cancer. With proper treatment, children Lily's age have excellent prognoses." "Proper treatment," David repeated bitterly, looking up at her with eyes that held too much knowledge of what medical treatment cost. "How much, Sarah? How much is it going to cost to save my daughter's life this time?" Sarah had spent hours researching the answer to that question, and the numbers were staggering. Depending on the type and stage of cancer, we could be looking at anywhere from $200,000 to $500,000 over the course of treatment. David made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. $500,000. I make $32,000 a year, Sarah. I couldn't save that much money if I worked for 20 years without spending a penny on anything else. "You don't have to," Sarah said quietly. "The Chen Morgan Foundation has already been established to handle exactly these kinds of situations." David stared at her as if she'd spoken in a foreign language. The what foundation? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to reveal would either save their relationship or destroy it completely. 2 months ago, I used my trust fund to establish a medical foundation, specifically designed to pay for emergency and critical care for families who can't afford it. It's named after your family, David. Lily inspired me to create something that would ensure no parent ever has to choose between their child's health and financial security. "You named a foundation after us?" David's voice was incredulous. "After the people who taught me what medicine should really be about," Sarah replied. "The foundation has already helped dozens of families, and it will help Lily too. You won't have to worry about the cost of her treatment, David. You can focus entirely on helping her get better." David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window that looked out over the apartment complex playground. "You don't get it, do you?" he said, his back to her. "You think you can solve everything with money. I think I can solve financial problems with money, Sarah said carefully, which frees people up to deal with the problems that money can't solve, like helping their daughter fight cancer. And what happens when the foundation runs out of money? What happens to all those families you're helping then? The foundation is funded by a permanently endowed trust that generates several $1 million a year in interest alone, Sarah said. It will never run out of money. David turned to face her, and Sarah was surprised to see tears in his eyes. Don't you understand what you've done? He asked. You've made it impossible for me to refuse help without feeling like I'm putting my pride ahead of my daughter's life. Good, Sarah said firmly, because that's exactly what you'd be doing. So I don't get a choice. I just have to accept that you're going to pay for everything, forever? You get to choose how to respond to the gift, Sarah said, but you don't get to choose whether it's offered. David, I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Using it to help Lily isn't a sacrifice for me. It's the best possible use of wealth I never earned in the first place. Before David could respond, Lily appeared in the doorway to her bedroom, looking confused and concerned. Daddy, why are you crying? Is everything okay? David quickly wiped his eyes and forced a smile. Everything's fine, baby girl. Dr. Sarah and I were just talking about some important grown-up stuff. Lily looked between them with the kind of perceptiveness that children often display when adults think they're not paying attention. Are you fighting again? Because I don't like it when people I love are mad at each other. The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Lily had used the word love so casually, so naturally, as if it were obvious that the three of them belonged together in some fundamental way. We're not fighting, Sarah said gently. We're trying to figure out how to take the best care of you. I don't need that much taking care of, Lily said with 8-year-old confidence. I'm pretty tough. David knelt down and pulled his daughter into a hug that lasted longer than usual. Sarah watched them together, this father who'd already lost so much, and this little girl who had no idea what battle might be waiting for her, and felt something resolve inside her chest. Lily, David said softly, do you remember when Mommy got sick? Lily nodded against his shoulder. She had to go to the hospital a lot. Well, we found out today that you might need to go to the hospital more too, just for a little while, to make sure you stay healthy and strong. Lily pulled back to look at her father's face. Am I sick like Mommy was? We don't know yet, David said honestly. But if you are, we're going to do everything we can to help you get better. Lily considered this information with the kind of seriousness that made her seem older than her 8 years. Then she turned to Sarah. Will you be my doctor again, if I have to have more surgery? Sarah looked at David, waiting for his permission or rejection. After a long moment, he nodded. If you want me to be, Sarah said to Lily, then yes, I'll be your doctor. Good, Lily said with satisfaction, because I trust you to fix me when I'm broken. As the three of them sat together in that small living room, planning for a battle that none of them wanted to fight, Sarah realized that some gifts couldn't be refused, not because they were too generous to turn down, but because refusing them would hurt the giver more than accepting them would cost the receiver. David was going to let her help save his daughter's life, not because he'd forgiven her for lying about her wealth, but because he loved Lily more than he resented Sarah's advantages. It wasn't the reunion Sarah had dreamed of, but it was something more important. It was a chance to prove that love, in all its forms, was stronger than pride, fear, or the accidents of birth that determined how much money someone inherited. And for now, that was enough. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the observation deck of the newly opened Chin Morgan Pediatric Care Center, watching through the floor-to-ceiling windows as children played in the therapeutic garden below. The facility, built adjacent to St. Mary's Hospital, represented everything she'd learned about medicine, money, and what it meant to truly help people. The garden was Lily's design, or at least it had been inspired by an 8-year-old's crayon drawing of what a healing place should look like. There were spaces for quiet reflection, areas for physical therapy disguised as play equipment, and a greenhouse where young patients could grow vegetables and flowers as part of their recovery process. In the center stood a bronze sculpture of a family, 2 adults and a child, looking up at a night sky filled with stars. The dedication ceremony starts in 20 minutes, Marcus Webb said, approaching with a clipboard full of final details. The mayor's here, along with representatives from the state medical board, several hospital administrators, and about 30 families who've been helped by the foundation. Sarah nodded, adjusting the simple black dress she'd chosen for the occasion. Any word from the Chens? David's truck just pulled into the parking lot. Lily's with him, and she's carrying what looks like a very large poster board. Sarah smiled despite the butterflies in her stomach. Today would be the first time she'd seen David and Lily together in a public setting since Lily had been declared cancer-free 6 months ago. The treatment had been grueling. 8 months of chemotherapy, radiation, and careful monitoring. But Lily had approached it with the same curiosity and determination she brought to everything else in her life. The cancer had been caught early enough that the prognosis had always been good, but watching Lily go through treatment had been one of the most difficult experiences of Sarah's life. She'd been there for every appointment, every scan, every moment when David's composure had cracked under the weight of watching his daughter suffer. Somewhere during those long months in pediatric oncology, their relationship had evolved into something neither of them had expected, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and love for a remarkable little girl. "Dr. Morgan," a young voice called out from the doorway. Sarah turned to see Tommy Rodriguez, a 7-year-old who'd undergone heart surgery 3 months ago, standing with his mother. "My mom says we're supposed to thank you for the new playground equipment in the cardiac ward." "You don't need to thank me, Tommy," Sarah said, kneeling to his eye level. "But I'm glad you like it. Are you feeling strong enough to use the monkey bars yet?" "Almost," Tommy said proudly. "Dr. Walsh says maybe next month." As Tommy and his mother headed toward the main ceremony area, Sarah was reminded of why she'd built this place. The Chen Morgan Foundation had helped over 200 families in its first year of operation. But Sarah had quickly realized that financial assistance was only part of what families needed. They also needed a place where medical care felt less like a cold, institutional process and more like a community effort to help children heal. The pediatric center was designed to address that need. Every room had windows that let in natural light. The walls were covered with artwork created by young patients. The staff included not just doctors and nurses, but art therapists, music therapists, and child life specialists who understood that healing involved more than just medical procedures. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from David. "Lily wants to show you her presentation before the ceremony. We're in the main lobby." Sarah's heart rate picked up as she made her way downstairs. She and David had maintained a careful friendship over the past year, bonded by their shared commitment to Lily's well-being, but cautious about crossing lines that might complicate their co-parenting dynamic. Because that's what it had become, really, co-parenting. Sarah was involved in every aspect of Lily's life now, from school events to medical appointments to weekend trips to the science museum. The lobby of the pediatric center was bustling with guests, but Sarah spotted Lily immediately. She was standing near the information desk, healthy and radiant, her dark hair grown back in soft waves after the chemotherapy. She wore a bright yellow dress and had a poster board nearly as tall as she was propped against a chair. "Dr. Sarah!" Lily rushed over, careful not to disturb her poster. "I made something special for today. Do you want to see?" "I'd love to see it," Sarah said, giving Lily a hug that lasted just long enough to remind her how close they'd come to losing this precious little girl. Lily turned the poster board around to reveal a detailed drawing of the solar system. But this wasn't like her previous space artwork. This version showed Earth prominently in the center, surrounded by planets that were labeled with words like hope, family, healing, and love. "It's the solar system of care," Lily explained seriously. "See, Earth is in the middle because that's where sick kids live, and all the other planets are the things that help them get better. Mars is doctors who care, and Jupiter is families who never give up, and Saturn, that's my favorite, Saturn is friends who become family." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she studied the artwork. "Lily, this is incredible. You've created something beautiful. I want to donate it to the center," Lily continued, "so other kids can see that even when you're sick, you're surrounded by good things." "That's very generous of you," Sarah said. "Are you sure you want to give it away?" "I'm sure. Besides," Lily grinned, "I can always make another one, and maybe the kids here will add their own planets to it." David approached, and Sarah was struck by how much he'd changed over the past year. The lines of constant worry had eased from his face, replaced by something that looked like peace. He'd left his job at the shipyard 6 months ago to become the family liaison coordinator for the Chen Morgan Foundation, helping other families navigate the complexities of pediatric medical care. "She's been working on that for weeks," David said, nodding toward the poster. "Ever since we told her about the dedication ceremony." "It's perfect," Sarah said. "Absolutely perfect." "Dr. Morgan," a voice called from across the lobby. Sarah turned to see her father approaching, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits who were probably board members from Morgan Healthcare Group. Sarah hadn't spoken to Richard Morgan in 8 months, not since she'd informed him that she was converting the majority of her trust fund into the foundation, and that she would no longer be participating in the family business. Their relationship had been strained before, but her decision to essentially give away her inheritance had created a rift that seemed permanent. "Father," Sarah said carefully, "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wanted to see what you'd built with your inheritance," Richard replied, his tone neutral, but his eyes sharp as they took in the children and families filling the lobby. "It's impressive. Thank you." Richard's gaze moved to David and Lily, and Sarah saw him register the obvious affection between them. "Mr. Chen, isn't it? And this must be Lily." "Yes, sir," David replied politely, though Sarah could sense his wariness. "Lily," Richard said, kneeling down with the kind of calculated charm he'd perfected over decades in business. "I hear you're the inspiration behind all of this." "I guess so," Lily said with characteristic directness. "Are you Dr. Sarah's daddy?" "I am." "She talks about you sometimes. She says you taught her to care about helping people, but that you disagree about the best way to do it." Richard's eyebrows rose slightly at Lily's perceptiveness. "What do you think the best way is?" "I think you should help people and then let them help other people too," Lily said matter-of-factly. "Like a chain reaction. Doctor, Sarah helped me, and now my daddy helps other families. And now maybe those families will help someone else someday." Richard studied Lily for a long moment, then stood and looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't quite read. "She's quite remarkable," he said quietly. "She is," Sarah agreed. "Perhaps," Richard said carefully, "we could discuss some potential collaboration between Morgan Healthcare Group and your foundation. There might be ways to expand this model to other cities." It was the closest thing to an apology or approval that Sarah was likely to get from her father, and she found herself nodding. "I'd be open to that conversation." The ceremony began 20 minutes later, with Sarah giving a brief speech about the importance of treating the whole child, not just their medical condition. She talked about the families who'd inspired the center, about the healthcare providers who'd committed to making medicine more humane, and about the children whose resilience had taught her more about healing than any medical textbook ever could. But the most moving part of the ceremony came when Lily took the microphone, standing on a small step stool so she could reach it properly. "My name is Lily Chen, and I'm 9 years old," she began, her voice clear and confident. "A year and a half ago, I was in a car accident, and then I got sick with cancer. I was really scared because I didn't understand what was happening to me." The audience was completely silent, captivated by this small girl's honesty. "But then I met Dr. Sarah, and she explained everything to me in ways that made sense, and she introduced me to my daddy. I mean, she helped my daddy understand that it's okay to accept help when you need it, and she taught me that being sick doesn't make you weak. It just makes you human." Lily paused, looking out at the audience with the kind of composure that would have been impressive in an adult. "This place isn't just about making sick kids better," she continued. "It's about making families stronger. It's about showing people that love is the best medicine, even though you still need real medicine too." The audience laughed gently at that. "I want to read you something I wrote for school about what I want to be when I grow up," Lily said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her pocket. "I want to be a doctor, like Dr. Sarah, because she showed me that fixing people's bodies is important, but fixing their hearts is important too. I want to build places like this all over the world, so no kid ever has to be scared and alone when they're sick. And I want to prove that families can be made in the lots of different ways, not just with the people you're born with, but with the people who choose to love you too." Sarah felt tears streaming down her face as Lily finished her speech to thunderous applause. When the little girl stepped down from the podium, she walked directly to Sarah and David, taking both of their hands. "Thank you," Lily said simply. for choosing to love me." The reception that followed was filled with conversations about expanding the foundation's work, but Sarah found herself drawn repeatedly to a quiet corner, where David stood, watching Lily demonstrate the art therapy room to a group of visitors. "She's going to change the world," Sarah said, joining him. "She already has," David replied. "At least, she changed mine." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the daughter they both loved share her enthusiasm for healing with anyone who would listen. "Sarah," David said quietly, "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't." "Yes, I do. I was so angry about you not telling me about your money that I almost let my pride cost Lily her life. That was inexcusable." Sarah turned to face him. "You were protecting your family the only way you knew how. I understand that now." "Do you?" David asked. "Because I'm not sure I understood it myself until recently." "What do you mean?" David was quiet for a moment, watching Lily explain the greenhouse project to a group of potential donors. "I spent so much time being afraid that I wasn't enough, not smart enough, not successful enough, not wealthy enough, that I almost missed what we actually had together." "Which was?" "A family," David said simply. "Not a perfect one, not a conventional one, but a real one, built on choice and commitment and love." Sarah felt something shift in her chest, a tension she'd been carrying for months finally releasing. "Is that what we have? A family?" David turned to face her fully, his expression serious but warm. "I'd like it to be, if you're interested in making it official." Sarah's heart stopped. "Official?" David smiled, the first truly relaxed smile she'd seen from him in over a year. "Sarah Morgan, would you like to marry a welder-turned-family advocate who comes with a very opinionated 9-year-old daughter and absolutely no money to contribute to the relationship?" "David Chen," Sarah replied, "I would be honored to marry you, and for the record, you're contributing everything that matters." As they kissed in the corner of the pediatric center they had built together, surrounded by the sound of children's laughter and families finding hope, Sarah realized that she'd finally discovered what her wealth was really for. Not to escape from the world's problems, but to engage with them more fully. Not to buy happiness, but to create the conditions where happiness could grow naturally. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, that happiness would choose you back. 18 months later, Sarah Chen stood in the same observation deck, now wearing scrubs instead of a dedication ceremony dress, watching her husband teach a group of fathers in the family support group about advocating for their children's medical needs. Their wedding had been small, just close friends, colleagues, and about 50 children from the pediatric center who'd insisted on attending. Lily, now 10 and cancer-free for over a year, had served as both flower girl and wedding planner, declaring that the ceremony needed more glitter and definitely space decorations. She'd gotten both. The Chen Morgan Foundation had expanded to 3 cities, with plans for 5 more locations over the next 2 years. But Sarah's favorite part of her new life wasn't the professional success or the public recognition. It was the ordinary moments, helping Lily with homework at the kitchen table, sharing weekend pancakes with David, falling asleep to the sound of 2 people she loved, discussing everything from space exploration to the proper way to load a dishwasher. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lily, who was at school. "Dad forgot to pack my astronomy book for the presentation today. Can you bring it? P.S. I love you." Sarah smiled, grabbing her keys and heading out to rescue her daughter's school day. As she drove through the city she'd grown up in, but never really seen until Lily and David had shown her how to look at it differently, Sarah reflected on how wrong she'd been about everything. She'd thought money was the problem, when really it was just a tool. She'd thought love required perfect circumstances, when really it just required courage. She'd thought family was about shared genetics, when really it was about shared commitment to each other's well-being. And she'd thought healing was about fixing what was broken, when really it was about creating something new from the pieces that remained. At Peninsula Elementary, Sarah delivered the astronomy book and stayed to watch Lily's presentation about black holes and the possibility of parallel universes. Afterwards, Lily's teacher pulled Sarah aside. "I've never seen a child so confident in her place in the world," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Whatever you and David are doing, it's working." "We're just loving her," Sarah replied. "Apparently that's enough." As Sarah drove back to the hospital, she passed the intersection where David and Lily's car had been hit 2 years ago. For just a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what her life would look like if that accident had never happened. She'd probably still be living alone in her downtown condo, performing surgery with technical excellence but no real passion, carrying her father's expectations like weights she could never quite set down. Instead, she was Dr. Sarah Chen, part of a family that had been forged by crisis and strengthened by choice. She was the co-founder of a foundation that had helped over 500 families and counting. She was the stepmother to a girl who still planned to be an astronaut, but had added "and doctor" and "family helper" to her career goals. Most importantly, she was exactly who she was supposed to be. That evening, as the three of them sat around their kitchen table, sharing Chinese takeout and planning Lily's upcoming science fair project, Sarah looked at her husband and daughter and felt the kind of contentment she'd never known was possible. "What are you thinking about?" David asked, noticing her expression. "Just how perfect this is," Sarah replied. "Imperfect but perfect." "That doesn't make sense," Lily pointed out, looking up from her low mane. "The best things usually don't," Sarah said, reaching over to ruffle Lily's hair. "That's what makes them magic." And in that moment, surrounded by the people who'd taught her what love actually looked like, Sarah Chen knew she'd finally found her way home.